Hey everyone.
Hello. Welcome.
Nice little library.
Yes, somewhere in old Europe.
Yeah, seems like it. Although people have pointed out that I have to straighten the lampshade on the lamp on the bookcase way in the back.
It's been that way for 300 years.
My Photoshop abilities don't take me there.
Right. Jerry, you're the third speaker tonight, just so you know.
Okay.
And while somebody else is speaking, we're going to go mute and turn our video off until it's our time to speak. But you can keep it open for now.
So is there, was it like 3 short presentations and then is there open Q&A?
That's correct.
And is this for 1 hour or an hour and a half?
We usually finished by 7:30. Sometimes there's an extra 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, good.
All right, microphone's off. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for attending Rare New England's Genetics Career Fair. I am Mark Horson, founding board member of Rare New England. The mission of Rare New England is to bring together New England patients, families, and providers touched by rare and complex disorders. RNE offers a number of educational opportunities, creates awareness of available resources, and builds foundations of support to improve patient quality of care. RNE also supports the educational and professional needs of healthcare providers. Regarding tonight's program, I would like to thank the following sponsors for their generous support of RNE's career fairs: the New England Regional Genetics Network, Homology Medicines, Ionis Pharmaceuticals, Ultragenyx Pharmaceutical, and Vertex Pharmaceuticals. So my specialty is pediatrics with a focus on genetics as a subspecialty, specifically the area of biochemical or metabolic genetics. So if you think back on your biochemistry, I deal with patients and families who have defects in those biochemical pathways. Now, biochemistry can be abstract and kind of dry, but it is that patient contact that really puts the human back in biochemistry and shows how relevant the urea cycle or the electron transport chain really is. Why are we doing this program tonight? Well, genetics impacts almost every area of medicine. So as you can imagine, there's a growing need for geneticists in this country and abroad. Patients and families want and need to hear information about the diseases they have, information to plan their futures, information as a couple with a family history looking to have children, and information about effective therapies now available for genetic disorders. Considering that there are over 7,000 rare diseases, not all genetic, and growing, there's a lot of information that needs to be shared. But the impact of genetics is not just in rare diseases. Genetics can impact how we manifest lots of mainstream diseases, like COVID, how we respond to disease, how we utilize medications, what medications are available and effective or safe, and so on. So this evening, you're going to hear from 3 physicians who specialize in the area of genetics: a general clinical geneticist, a specialist who treats patients with genetic metabolic diseases, and a geneticist who works in industry. You'll hear a bit about what they're doing, how their genetics expertise has helped to treat their patients and families, and or how the experience has impacted their own lives. A Q&A session will follow the 3 presentations. Please submit your questions as we go in the Q&A area, not chat. After that, I'll guide you through some additional opportunities to learn more about genetics. But first, You might think that liking biochemistry makes me a nerd, and the fact that I bring some biochemistry into the clinic makes me even more of a nerd. Well, fun fact, I am a nerd, but we genetics nerds can have fun. Let me show you how with this very interesting genetic pedigree. You can see that? All right. The pedigree nightmare. Oops, many, many years ago when I was 23, I was married to a widow. Well, I was married to a widow who was pretty as can be. This widow had a grown-up daughter who had hair of red. My father fell in love with her and soon they two were wed. This made my dad my son-in-law and really changed my life. Now my daughter was my mother because she was my father's wife. To complicate the matter, even though it brought me joy, I soon became the father of a bouncing baby boy. Wow, this is sticking. My little baby then became a brother-in-law to dad, and so became my uncle, though it made me very sad. For if he was my uncle, then that also made him brother of the widow's grown-up daughter, who of course was my stepmother. Father's wife then had a son who kept him on the run, and he became my grandchild, for he was my daughter's son. Waiting for the slide to change. My wife is now my mother's mother, and it makes me blue, because although she is my wife, she's my grandmother too. Now, if my wife is my grandmother, then I'm her grandchild, and every time I think of it, it nearly drives me wild. Because now I have become the strangest case you ever saw. As husband of my grandmother, I am my own grandpa. Oh, I'm my own grandpa. I'm my own grandpa. It sounds funny, I know, but it really is so. I'm my own grandpa. So with that, let me just clear that. Okay, so with that, let me introduce our first speaker. Dr. Farah Rajabi from Children's Hospital in Boston and Harvard Medical School. Dr. Rajabi obtained her MD degree from the University of Toledo College of Medicine in Toledo, Ohio. Following a pediatrics residency at Wake Forest University Baptist Medical Center, Winston-Salem, she completed a second residency in clinical genetics and a fellowship in medical biochemical genetics at Harvard Medical School. In 2017, she joined the clinical faculty in the Division of Genetics and Genomics. She is particularly interested in medical education, previously selected as Chief Fellow for the Harvard Medical School Genetics Training Program, and is now serving as Assistant Program Director. She is a member of the BCH Academy, and she completed the 2016-17 Rare Disease Research Network Certificate Program through Children's National Medical Center in Washington to train in specific research tools and methods unique to rare diseases. Dr. Rajabi, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to share my path to genetics. Many people take a meandering path to genetics, and I am among them. I did not know genetics was a career until my fourth year of medical school, when they did the presentation on how to match for residency, and I saw genetics on the list. There was no genetic program offered where I went to medical school, and so I did an away rotation. My very first exposure to genetics was at the University of California, San Francisco, where unbeknownst to me, I was among a lot of genetic celebrities, or as I call them now, genebrities, who are experts in their fields, who had written books on genetics. Dr. Nussbaum, who's written Genetics in Medicine, who some of you may use that book, Dr. Slavatnik, and when we saw patients each day, it was really fascinating clinical cases that went to every specialty in medicine. And in a really thoughtful and interesting way, we were approaching cancer patients, prenatal patients, complex metabolic patients, and patients with birth defects. And so it first sparked my interest in genetics. And so I was determined as I started my pediatric training to go somewhere where I would be connected still with geneticists. And I was lucky enough to meet several more geneticists at Wake Forest who were able to continue to mentor me in genetics until I started my training at Children's Hospital. Clinically, I practice within pediatric genetics. I've been able to have mentors among Dr. Cox in this forum and panel today who have been able to guide me towards different areas of expertise within genetics. And frankly, the world is so open within genetics, and we are able to see these families when they're really in a vulnerable place that can be so isolating because their child is born with the unexpected, with a rare birth defect, with a rare difference in the way they're growing and a rare difference in the way they're seeing, and try to guide them through that process, being the physician who knows what they're dealing with, who's seen it before and may be able to guide them. And sometimes, like earlier today in clinic, sometimes it's a condition you've never seen before, and you're still working to try to guide a family through that process. And so every day I get fascinated by a new clinical case or scenario. I am often able to collaborate with people from around the world. The network of geneticists really does extend around the world. If I see a rare diagnosis related to megalencephaly, yes, there might be a local expert in Boston, but I'll reach out to an expert in Seattle Children's Hospital because I met them at a conference and saw their presentation on megalencephaly. And so it becomes a network of experts that can help you navigate any patient scenario that comes your way. They say that when you hear hooves, think horses, and that is certainly not the case in genetics. You can think of zebras all day long. And even among the zebras, you'll see more common zebras, some zebras that look like horses because you're a geneticist and you start to become more acquainted with these scenarios. My path in genetics is naturally segued into a path in education because as a geneticist, you are often teaching yourself every day about new genetic progress and breakthroughs and therapies that are coming out. You're teaching your patients about a new diagnosis that's come out, how to navigate learning about this information, teaching other family members about this information, how to understand family planning related to it. And then you are also teaching physicians at Boston Children's Hospital, where we have a training program in genetics. So we are at Boston Children's Hospital training clinical genetic fellows and residents. And we actually have a ton of combined training programs now. So as assistant program director, I get to interview all of the wonderful candidates who come our way. And people come through genetics for either categorical genetics training, which is a 2 to 3 year training program that just focuses on genetics. And you do have to have at least 1 year of training in another medical specialty, but it can really be any specialty. It can be pediatrics, which is the route I took. It can also be internal medicine. We've also had people come through from urology and family medicine and ophthalmology. So people come with all different sorts of expertise our way, and genetics naturally helps them within their career path. Then there are a number of new and pretty exciting combined genetic training programs, which include pediatric genetics, internal medicine genetics. Both of those are 4-year training programs total, and they end with you having training in both pediatric and internal medicine genetics, or pediatrics and genetics, or internal medicine and genetics. There are also training programs in maternal fetal medicine and genetics. And so within all these paths, all of the trainees that come through the genetics program get training in prenatal genetics, cancer genetics, adult genetics, and pediatric genetics. And then through the adult and pediatric genetics, you may also get some metabolic training within genetics or choose to do an extra fellowship in medical biochemical genetics. This has been a fascinating career that I've been able to get through. I am never bored in any day of clinic because I'm always fascinated by the new patient that comes through, the result that doesn't make sense, the thing that I have to try to figure out. So I am definitely never bored in this career, and I am open to any questions that anyone has about training in clinical genetics in any way, shape, or form. Clinical genetics will naturally translate into some research opportunities because we don't want to just be diagnosticians. We want to help connect families to different types of cures and treatments, and those are rapidly emerging. And so we are often on the brink of gene therapy, gene editing, mRNA therapy. And so we naturally connect families to those types of treatments. And there's some really great stories out there of families that have been able to connect to this really personalized medicine, which may be the face of future treatment for rare disease. So I'm really excited about what that can bring for the families that we follow in clinic and that I meet every day. And maybe you can be part of that future for those families too. And I thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. Again, we're going to take questions. Put your questions down in the Q&A. And if you have questions for Dr. Rajabi or for other speakers, just write them there. All right, on to our second speaker, Dr. David Weinstein, Vice President of Clinical Development at Passage Bio. Following his graduation from Trinity College and Harvard Medical School, Dr. Weinstein did a residency, chief residency and fellowship in pediatric endocrinology at Boston Children's Hospital. He subsequently obtained a master's in clinical investigation from Harvard and MIT and became the director of the glycogen storage disease program at Boston Children's. In 2005, he moved to the University of Florida, where he directed the glycogen storage disease program and became a tenured professor. He and his team then moved to the University of Connecticut and Connecticut Children's Medical Center in 2017 to perform gene therapy for GSD. In 2020, he left the academic world to serve as Vice President of Clinical Development and the medical lead for the GM1 gangliosidosis gene therapy trial at Passage Bio. At the time of his departure for clinical care, he was following over 700 GSD patients from 49 states and 52 countries. Dr. Weinstein has published over 100 publications on glycogen storage disease and gene therapy for rare diseases. In 1989, he was named as one of the inaugural Goldwater Scholars. He is a former Jan Albrecht Award winner from the American Association for the Study of Liver Diseases, and he was the George Sacher Award winner from the Gerontological Society of America. In 2013, Dr. Weinstein was honored with the Order of the Smile International Humanitarian Award, and he was knighted in Poland. He has also been inducted into the Rare Disease Research Hall of Fame. Dr. Weinstein, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Are you guys able to see my slides? Because
yes.
I am very technology challenged. So let me begin by a confession. When I was a medical student, I had no interest in biochemistry. I had no interest in rare diseases. And I am very, very fortunate that when I was a resident, I had the privilege of attending lectures by Dr. Korson. And he is one of the reasons why I am doing what I'm doing today. And I will always be indebted to him for showing me this pathway. So what I'd like to do is, for the next few minutes, show you my journey. I've lived all the different aspects. I started in basic science, doing bench work. I then went to clinical work, ended up in rare diseases, and now I'm in industry. And I want to show you the benefits and the good sides and the bad sides of all the different areas. As you heard, I am working for Passage Bio, and so I am working for industry, and I've worked for a lot of companies, and they're all listed here, or at least I was consulting for those, but they were all unpaid except for Passage Bio. When I was a medical student, I was lost trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I loved everything. I didn't know what I wanted though. And my advisor gave me a book to read, and it said Living a Life That Matters. That was the title of the book. And I read it, and the major theme was trying to define what's important for a person. Is it money? Is it titles? Is it publications? And ultimately, one of the conclusions is if you make a difference in people's lives, then that's what brings happiness. And what I hope to convince everybody is that doing rare diseases accomplishes that. And that allows you to make a difference because so many people are struggling. But when I was in medical school and before that, I did not see it that way. I started as an Alzheimer's pharmacologist, and I came to Boston in 1989 to do Alzheimer's research because I thought the biggest fields were the where to go. I came to Boston because 3 of the 5 biggest researchers in the field were there. And I was fortunate to be able to have a laboratory at Mass General doing Alzheimer's pharmacology work. The basic science world was wonderful. I loved the challenge, but I had a problem with it. The first thing is that even though the research was successful, it wasn't making a difference in the lives of patients. And to me, that's the reason to do work, is to help people. And I didn't see the work making a difference. Another thing that frustrated me is I came to medical school very idealistic. I thought everybody is in the field to help people. And then I got to Mass General and I realized that even though a lot of the leaders were there, people didn't talk, they didn't collaborate. In these big fields, it was all about who could have the most grants and who could have the most publications. And I loved the research, but I also didn't like to watch people deteriorate. And that was very tough to do. So I took a risk, and this is another thing that I encourage people to do, is don't always take the safe route. So even though as you heard, in 1991, I was awarded the recognition for the leading research in the field of gerontology by a graduate student in the country, I decided to give it all up and was reincarnated as a pediatrician. And I came into pediatrics still not knowing what to do. And then I ran into Dr. Corson, and he helped me see the light that rare disease work was where to go. But initially I didn't get that. I still thought big fields were the way to go, and I was going to do diabetes, and I became a pediatric endocrinologist. And in 1998, I had the opportunity to go to the National Conference for Glycogen Storage Disease. I wish I could tell you that I was going there because I was so inspired to do GSD, but the truth is I went to the conference because it was in Seattle, and it was a free trip to Seattle. I had never been there, and I thought it would be fun to go there. When I got to the conference, I was shocked by what I saw. The conference began with a moment of silence, and they read the names of all the children in the United States and Canada who died that year from glycogen storage disease. The conference was the most depressing weekend that I've ever had in terms of academics. The conference was devoted to liver transplantation. And if your only hope is a liver transplant in a 1 or 2-year-old, that's not good, because we know, especially back in the 90s, that those children were not going to survive long term. What I found most depressing is that there was no clinical research going on anywhere in the world at that point. It was only genetic research. And there had been 16 years without a major advancement in the field. If there's no research, there's no hope, and it wasn't going to get better. I decided over lunch at that conference that this is where I could make a difference. And I remember coming back to Boston Children's, and I spoke to my division chief, who was not in the genetics metabolism field, and I was told I was going to commit academic suicide if I stopped doing diabetes and did glycogen storage disease. But sometimes you have to follow your heart, and that's what I did. And to me, it was one of the best decisions, short of marrying my wife, which is the best decision. This was probably the second best decision I ever made, was pursuing GSD. Well, I loved every day of my clinical practice. And we went from a disease where people did poorly to, you can see on the slide, people had no limitations. People did really well because of advancements that occurred in the field. In 2001, the first child was born to a mother with GSD, and now we've had 59 children born to those mothers. And number 60 is going to be born next week. So I could see the work making a difference. In fact, 8 of my patients became doctors, and one of them will be starting a genetics fellowship next year, and I hope she's also going to pursue GSD. But that wasn't good enough. The problem with glycogen storage disease is that you have to be perfect at all times. And so one missed dose of cornstarch could lead to a child dying, and that happened, unfortunately. So in 1998, I started working on gene therapy, and we went from liver cells to mice to dogs. In 2018, I got to see a dream come true. So after going through all the models and all the animals, I was able to convince a drug company to pursue gene therapy for glycogen storage disease. And we were able to treated the first patient with glycogen storage disease type 1A with gene therapy in July 2018. I'm happy to report that that patient is still completely off treatment 3.5 years later and doing great. So it was a culmination of a dream to be able to go from a disease where people didn't do well to one where we have people off treatment. Unfortunately, COVID came along. And one of the problems with rare diseases is that patients have to travel in for care. We don't have a lot of local patients. And where I was, we lost support because hospitals, unfortunately, are focused on money. And so I was approached during COVID when my team was being furloughed to come work for industry. And I decided that all children deserve to be healthy. And I made the transition to industry about 16 months ago. As you heard, I'm working on gene therapy for GM1 gangliosidosis. We're also doing gene therapy for metachromatic leukodystrophy. And I love this challenge because these children deserve to be healthy, and these are devastating diseases. The advantage of industry is that it's the opportunity to bring cutting edge and life-threatening treatments to children, and I love that. But I do miss the interaction with the family. The problem that I have with industry, even though I'm very happy and it's going really well, I miss the interactions with the families. I miss seeing the benefit directly. It's all indirect, so we're not allowed to interact with the families. So there are advantages and disadvantages to all the different areas. What I'd like to end with is just a couple lessons for those people who are training still. Bigger is not always better. I think the rare diseases people are nicer, they work together, and you can make a real big difference. You can make a huge impact in the field of genetics and rare diseases because these children suffer like they were with glycogen storage disease. Sorry, I don't know what the formatting is weird. Many children to this day and adults suffer because of lack of knowledge of these rare diseases. And we have to fight and make sure that we're advocating for these kids and do the best treatment we can. I encourage everybody to take some chances, don't take the safe way, and don't lose your idealism. Everybody went into medicine to make a difference, to help people. And this is how you can do it. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my experience. And if anybody ever wants to talk, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weinstein. Very inspiring. All right, on to our third speaker, Dr. Jerry Cox, also from Children's Hospital in Boston and Harvard Medical School, but much more. Dr. Cox is a board-certified geneticist, clinical, biochemical, and molecular, who continues to see patients part-time at Boston Children's, where he was previously on full-time staff and completed his pediatrics and genetics training. He is an instructor in pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. He received his MD PhD from the University of California at San Diego in 1989 and a BA in biology magna cum laude from Harvard College in 1980. He has over 80 peer-reviewed publications. He began his industry career in 2000 at Genzyme, where he rose to vice president of clinical development for rare diseases. During his 16 years there, he led the clinical development programs for several lysosomal storage disorders that resulted in the approvals of therapies for mucopolysaccharidosis type 1, which is Hurler syndrome, type 2, which is Hunter syndrome, and Gaucher disease type 1, the last in 2014. Between 2016 and 2018, Dr. Cox was chief medical officer at Aditas Medicine, where he oversaw clinical development, regulatory affairs, and scientific communications. He was the medical lead on the first US IND for an in vivo delivered CRISPR-based medicine to treat Leber congenital amaurosis type 10, the most common cause of genetic blindness in children. In 2018, he founded Gerald Cox Rare Care Consulting to assist small biotechnology companies and help them develop drugs for rare genetic diseases. He consults in a number of disease areas like inborn errors of metabolism, muscular dystrophy, neurologic disorders, immunodeficiencies, complement-mediated diseases using a number of therapeutic approaches ranging from small molecules to biologics to genome editing. He often serves in a chief medical officer role at these companies and provides strategic advice on disease targets, clinical development, and regulatory interactions. In 2019, Dr. Cox joined the board of the National Tay-Sachs and Allied Diseases Association, where he leads their strategic research initiative. He was a founding member of both the Pediatric Cardiomyopathy Registry and the Barth Syndrome Foundation. And in 2020, he joined the Foundation Gene Therapy Advisory Board. Dr. Cox, thank you for coming and joining us this evening.
Thanks, Mark. And to keep the legacy going, I also trained under Dr. Corson back in the day. And it's nice to see my colleagues, David and Farah, both participating today. And I think what you get from all three of us is that we each share a passion for what we're doing. We're both, all three of us, we're very excited about the way we're using genetics to better people's lives, whether it's in an academic setting or a research setting. I think when people go through college, through medical school, through residency, they really don't get exposed to industry and the type of career path that can offer. So what I wanted to do in my short time tonight was tell you a bit about a day in the life of working in industry, how it differs from academia, and what some of the real benefits are to being in industry. So, I would say, most of my career, has been in clinical development for rare genetic diseases. And what does that mean? Clinical development is for drugs that aren't approved yet. So they're investigational drugs. And, these are very tightly regulated in countries. And you need to get approval from the FDA to study them in patients because patients need to be protected. And that's one of the FDA's mandates. And so drug development is the way that we get new drugs approved for diseases where there were none. And as Dr. Corson mentioned, there's over 7,000 known rare diseases, but there's only treatments for about 5% of them. So as a career path, if you're interested in bringing new treatments to people that have genetic diseases, this is a great growth area that is just expanding and continues to expand. And with all the new technologies, especially the personalized medicines, whether it's enzyme replacement therapy or antibody therapies, oligonucleotides, messenger RNA, gene therapy, gene editing, cell therapy. The next wave beyond that is really going to be individualized genetic therapies. And right now, I think, for an individual patient who shows up to Dr. Rajabi's clinic and has genetic testing done and is found to have a genetic change that might be amenable to a treatment, right now there's no real path forward for individual patients because drugs, as you'll learn, are developed for populations of patients. But, I think I would argue, as many other people argue as well, if you think of, let's say, gene editing or gene therapy or oligonucleotide therapy as really molecular surgery, if you will, it's really not different than going in to have an operation where maybe, there is some standard protocol that your surgeon is following, but because of the specifics of your case, they need to adapt it to your specific situation. Surgeries are not regulated by the FDA, but drugs are. And I think we're at a point where technology has really kind of outpaced our regulatory framework. And there will be changes, I'm certain of it, in the future that will enable people to have individual therapies really tailored for their specific condition and their specific genetic change. And I know David had a confession earlier. I need to confess as well. I avoided genetics like the plague when I was in college. I heard rumors that it was really hard. I didn't want to get involved in a course that was going to not be understandable to me. And then I wound up going to graduate school where I majored in biology and cell biology in particular. And as a first year grad student, you need to be a teaching assistant to the undergrads. And being a first year TA, you get the bottom choice of all the possibilities. And of course, even in grad school, no one wants to be a teaching assistant for genetics. So there I was getting assigned genetics. I told them, is at UCSD, what a mistake they were making, that I was not the person to teach these impressionable undergrads genetics. But they said, well, you don't really have a choice in the matter. So I set out to learn genetics. I would go to the library, take out textbooks, read the same genetics concept in 3 different ways. And I got to the point where I really understood genetics pretty well by the end of that course. And, staying 1 week ahead of the students was a good strategy for me. And, it's from that I really began to appreciate what genetics was all about. And the university that I was at, UCSD, their pediatrics program was heavily stocked with professors that were studying the underlying basis of rare genetic diseases. At that point, in the 80s, we didn't know what caused a lot of these disorders. Certainly many of the genes weren't known, but it was during that descriptive phase that I became really fascinated with genetics. And most genetic conditions affect children, and that led to me pursuing both pediatric and genetics. Once I left Children's Hospital, I really became focused on developing drugs for populations of patients with rare genetic diseases. I was actually the first geneticist hired by Genzyme, and they were in a situation where they had the technology to treat a number of different lysosomal storage disorders, but they didn't really understand the diseases. They didn't know what the medical problems were. They didn't know how to evaluate them in a clinical trial. And so that was actually a perfect fit for me, because I had seen a lot of these patients in the clinic, but couldn't do anything for them. So now going to industry, people would say, don't you miss seeing patients? Well, I never really stopped seeing patients, but what I tell them is, instead of seeing a lot of patients with lots of different diseases in the clinic, I now see a lot of patients, but they all have the same disease, much like what David mentioned with GSD type 1. So, as a clinical development physician, you're tasked with demonstrating that a drug, is safe and effective before it gets approved. You get to write the clinical trial protocol that will demonstrate that the drug is providing clinical benefit. Many times that's a challenge because there have never been studies done in these patient populations. So you have to determine, what would be an endpoint for the study that would convince people that there's clinically meaningful benefits. So I learned a lot about, how to demonstrate that drugs are actually working. I'd say for people in industry, clinical development is a very scientifically rooted role. You need to be curious. You need to be able to deal with the unknown. You got to be pretty flexible in recognizing that there may not be information available, and figure out ways to go out and get it so that you can design the clinical trial that'll get the drug approved that'll benefit patients. There's other roles in industry in addition to clinical development. There's what we call medical affairs. These are usually roles staffed by physicians who help educate physicians about approved products. So, in a sense, the clinical development physician, once a product is approved, we hand it off to the medical affairs physician who may now help educate the community, the medical community about this new treatment, perhaps facilitate the writing of new clinical practice guidelines, help interact with patient organizations. There's other roles as well. There are people who specialize in safety monitoring. We call that pharmacovigilance. They're part of the drug development team. They really focus on the safety part, both within the clinical trial as well as, once the drug is on the market. If there are any safety issues that come up, they get reported and reviewed by the safety officer. There are people with medical backgrounds that work in business development, and this is seeking out new opportunities. It might be a new technology, a new treatment approach, might be a product that a small company has that a bigger company wants to license in. So there's a whole host of different roles in academia, and I think they really just kind of play up to what drives you and what your personality is. I find industry to be really an incredible career opportunity for me. Once I made the jump to industry, I never looked back. People would say, well, you're going to the dark side. And I think now I can really honestly say, no, I saw the light. I found a career path and avocation that, was really challenging for me, trying to figure out how to get new drugs approved. Very meaningful. We'd hear patient stories, what life was like before a treatment and now how a drug has impacted their life. It's also very rewarding. In industry, like most businesses, a lot of your performance is gauged by achieving different milestones. So filing your first IND, completing clinical trials, doing a regulatory submission for drug approval. These are all notches on your belt, so to speak, that are a measure of how you're doing and your success. And I would say, overall, it's been a very fulfilling career for me. When I was working at Genzyme, I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and go to work. I worked in a really stimulating environment. I was surrounded by not only, medical peers, but also people, in other areas of drug development, regulatory, statistics, clinical operations that I also learned so much from. And so, people say, if you really love your job, it's really not a job, it's fun to do. And like Dr. Corson, I guess that would maybe make me a nerd if I like to read and think about this stuff in my spare time. But, it's really been a wonderful career in industry. And, like other jobs, whether it's academia or business, there are different career paths you can take, different levels. You may start off as a medical director, after a few years, get promoted to senior medical director. After that, vice president. After that, maybe even chief medical officer. So there's definitely room for a career advancement. There is also, I would say, financial security in being in industry. I think the notion of getting a bonus every year for doing a good job might be foreign to a lot of people in academia, but it's actually pretty common in industry. And especially if you join a small company, there could be an opportunity to help share in the success of the company by getting stock or stock options in the company. And that also makes life very exciting. So there's a lot of really interesting aspects of being in industry. And if any of you are interested in learning more, certainly feel free to reach out. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, I'll ask the speakers to turn on their mics and video. I'll just add a 1-minute summary because I've taken a little bit of a different tack. After 25 years in clinical medicine, where I also prioritized education, I realized that a major obstacle for this field is that there's a workforce shortage of geneticists, and especially in my area, biochemical genetics, so that there are hospitals that are underserved. There are whole swaths of the country that don't have a biochemical geneticist. So I actually left clinical medicine to pioneer the concept of physician support, where as long as there's somebody on site who will see the patient, usually a geneticist, but it could be a neurologist or a hospitalist, I back them up so they can see the patient but get access to metabolic expertise. Is that as good as face-to-face care? No, but we don't have the luxury, at least in this country and certainly abroad, of having enough to go around. So that, and because there's not enough of us, we need other physicians to participate in diagnosis and management. So I also focus now on educating non-geneticists on how to recognize some of these symptoms, so to help us along and again, provide patients with access to a possible metabolic diagnosis. There are lots of wonderful therapies out there, but if you don't have a diagnosis, the therapy, you're not going to benefit from the therapy. So let me start with some questions. Some of these questions were sent in before tonight's program. Let's start with Dr. Rajabi. What is your favorite thing about your job?
There's a lot of favorite things about my job. I really enjoy teaching, but I think the thing that is most fulfilling about my job, that makes me, fill me with a little bit more joy when I go home, is when a patient or a child that I follow, their genetic diagnosis or their metabolic diagnosis is the 1,000th most interesting thing about them. That we've been able to give them a management and a framework for their care that keeps them happy, healthy kids running around playing. I think a lot of times if you're in the hospital getting genetics consults or metabolic consults, you see these families in crisis, learning just about their birth defects, just about, a potential metabolic diagnosis. And then when you see them in clinic, you see them going to school, learning about robotics, becoming interested in genetics. And I had a patient with Bardet-Biedl syndrome who taught her whole class about her Bardet-Biedl syndrome. She explained to them why she was losing her vision. She explained what genes were. She explained what recessive inheritance was. And so seeing kids be kids first and not let the genetic diagnosis define them in any way is a very cool part of my job.
Great. Dr. Cox, do you recommend learning coding or programming skills to someone graduating college and wanting to enter industry? I've started to pick up Python and R skills through my research lab and my classes, and I've heard lots from my professors about it being an extremely useful skill for someone with an interest in industry genomics.
So I think, potentially for genomics and big data analysis in general could be important. I think it really comes down to what your specific interest is. There's certainly a lot of positions in companies that really focus on genetics that, you just need basic Microsoft Office skills, really Word, Excel. You don't need the high-powered programming, but if that's something of interest to you, I would reach out to any number of the genomics companies, and just like there's internships that can be offered at hospitals. There's often internships that are offered during the summers at companies as well.
Thank you, Dr. Weinstein. How are your patient encounters when you were seeing patients? How are they different from the encounters with other clinicians?
So my patients became my family. One of the unique features of genetics and rare diseases is that you get to really know these people. And I felt that my relationships with my patients were much stronger than I saw other physicians having with their patients. And I was very fortunate. As I mentioned, 8 of my patients became physicians, And most of them at some point work with me, which was a dream, to see your patients grow up to become colleagues. To this day, even though I've left, I still talk to a lot of the people. So I think that's one of the unique features of this, of being in a rare disease, really the relationships. And I honestly, Jerry, I hear what you say about industry. I love industry. I love going to work every day, but I miss that. I do miss that interaction.
Okay. Dr. Rajabi, do you believe there are any difficulties in this field that med students or pre-med students should be aware of, or they're not fully explained before pursuing genetics? What do you wish you knew before you went into genetics?
I think there's a lot of aspects of any subspecialized field that mainly comes from geography. A lot of times the jobs in genetics are at bigger institutions, and there's a need for geneticists at smaller institutions, but sometimes there's not financial support for them there. So you do have to kind of gravitate a little bit more towards big cities, which was not a problem for me, but it's definitely something that you have to keep in mind thinking of it. That being said, rural areas definitely need access to genetics. There is essentially very few people in upstate New York who have access to genetics right now. And the people who do have a very long wait list. And so there's a huge need. The other thing is that, and I hope this all becomes easier over time, is that there's, some burden of insurance documentation. Unfortunately, sometimes the world of insurance reimbursement hasn't caught up to the technology of genetics. And every once in a while, I'll get a rejection for a very standard genetic test being experimental from an insurance company. And I will tell them in very strong words that this is not experimental care. This is, a standard care that should be offered to families. And so sometimes that's an uphill battle. Hopefully one that will become easier over time as insurance companies realize that arriving at a diagnosis sooner is to a family's benefit, is to a treatment's benefit, and hopefully would lower cost in the long run.
Thank you. Dr. Weinstein, what does an academic career in medical genetics look like for a MD, PhD physician scientist?
So I'll just say that I think genetics really suits an academic career because there's so much that can be done both clinically in terms of clinical research and in basic science. So I lived, I think, the dream world. I was seeing patients every day when I was in the clinical, when I was doing clinical medicine. I was doing clinical translational studies. I had a lab where we were doing mouse models of glycogen storage disease and doing gene therapy in mice and dogs. I got to teach. I loved teaching, just like you heard from Dr. Rajabi. Mentoring fellows was fantastic, and I also miss that. And then I got to write. So being in a rare disease allows you to really do a little bit of everything. One of the things that I really found different in rare diseases compared to my Alzheimer's or diabetes experience was that my colleagues were truly passionate, caring people in genetics and rare diseases. And we all work together much better than in the bigger diseases to help patients. And ultimately, that's what it's about. So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Dr. Cox, give us an overview. How has the field of genetics changed since you've been a clinician? How do you see this changing as some of us want to enter the field of medicine? And how should that guide our academic path on the way to genetics?
Yeah, so I think genetics is, entering, a new era of treatment. When I first started, all we had was a routine chromosome analysis as the only diagnostic test, and then Fragile X testing came along, and then in the mid-90s, fluorescence in situ hybridization, and then sequencing individual genes in the late 90s, and then panels of genes, and now whole exome sequencing and whole genome sequencing. So the diagnostics, has just grown tremendously over the last 30 years. And I think, there's still more about the genome that we don't understand, in particular, the role of all the non-coding regions in the genome, which make up 99% of the genome. We still don't really have a good understanding of what their role and function is. So, diagnostically, I think we've come a long way. I think, what Dr. Rajabi mentioned, about genetic testing, I would like to see genetic testing, ordered just like a blood test, a routine blood test. And yet, a lot of insurance companies, they still have some reservations about, what the impact of genetic testing will have on patients' care. Is it really going to change anything? And I think if you talk to most families, not knowing what is going on with their child for so many years is, hell. And being able to come up with a definitive answer for, what has plagued them all these years. And his expression, the devil is better than the devil you don't know. At least it gives people an opportunity to start focusing on what the underlying cause of their condition is. And maybe, there is a treatment out there, or I've seen families that have started support groups and raised money to develop their own treatments. And, I think people can be empowered, with knowledge. And so, from a diagnostics point of view, I think we are going to have more and more availability of genetic testing as the costs come down. And I think, the different treatments, whether it's, traditional, gene augmentation therapy with AAV or lentivirus or genome editing, cell therapies. I think there's a whole multitude of genetic approaches that are going to be useful for patients in the future. And I would also say that, you don't necessarily have to be a card-carrying geneticist to use genetics. You heard from Dr. Weinstein that he was an endocrinologist who got interested in genetics. There are people that call themselves, molecular cardiologists. Genetics is permeating all the different fields, all the different specialties. So, if you do have a particular organ of interest, be it the liver or the heart or some endocrine gland, if you want to be able to combine that with genetics, you can certainly do so, through that organ subspecialty.
Thank you very much. A last question, short question, actually, for Dr. Rajabi. And then I'm going to introduce other opportunities to learn about genetics as a career and how to apply for that. So that'll answer some of your questions. Dr. Rajabi, my field of interest is pretty narrow. I am looking to work in marine genetics and apply it to the medical field. How do I get there? And related to that, how hard is it to make the jump into genetics from a different academic program?
What's interesting is that we've had so many people jump into genetics from so many different types of fields, is that we're very used to mentoring and helping people adapt to their particular genetic expertise or background into this like new world of genetics training. And so the good thing is we have experience on that. And so the difficulty for each person is individual if they encounter it. So, whether it's, being in a clinical environment, being new and different. But since we've seen, I think one of our most unusual trainees in the past few years was somebody who was a urologist who had been doing research lab training for 3 years and hadn't seen a clinical patient in that time period, and then came to us and, he is a very fine geneticist now and does very good work. And so I think with the flexibility and the background of a scientist and the thought process of a scientist, it translates very well into clinical genetics practice.
Thank you. All right, so stay on. We're going to go through these opportunities, and then I'll ask I hope you will participate in an evaluation of this program. So let me share my screen. All right. So additional learning experiences, and certainly write to us if you have any questions about this or you want more information. So the first opportunity, one-on-one conversations with a geneticist. And the geneticists here have offered their time. You choose the type of genetic subspecialist. It's an opportunity to talk with the geneticist about their careers and about your interests. So, and in this one-on-one connection, you can focus on your career path. So let us know, and we can put you in touch with a geneticist, but it's best to prepare a letter of intent and a CV in advance. The American Society of Human Genetics has a great website. They actually have something called Careers in Human Genetics with information about career options at all levels of the academic ladder, everywhere from undergrad to postdoctoral. And for those of you who are in genetics or who are getting close to it, there's a career accelerator function with advice for career search, interviews, and negotiation. By the way, you're going to get copies of all these. If you haven't already, we'll circulate these to you. The concept of an on-site elective, an opportunity to shadow a geneticist as she or he sees patients in clinic. So you would hear about a patient and a disease and the concerning issues of the day, but arranging electives requires planning and hospital clearance. If you're interested, we can put you in touch with a geneticist. Again, prepare a letter of intent and a CV. Then an online elective, which is an online counterpart to the in-hospital experience in which a clinician is shadowed. It's an opportunity to hear about 2 or 3 diseases and patients with those diseases. The whole elective lasts about 60 to 75 minutes. Each elective has a particular theme. We are hosting one online elective December 1st, metabolic diseases associated with stroke. If you're interested, contact us for details. Rare New England operates a rare disease speaker series during the Rare Disease Day season, which is January to March, recognizing that Rare Disease Day is the last day in February. Each is a 1-hour presentation at a major medical center or educational program. It starts with a brief 15-minute medical overview of the disease, and then a patient or caregiver describes the patient experience with a Q&A opportunity at the end. Let us know if you're interested. This was the Rare Disease Day speaker series last year. These were the sites that we participated at rather remotely, of course. And these are the disorders that were covered. These all have more of a metabolic, about chemical genetics bent because I run the program and guess what I do. And then the American College of Medical Genetics Foundation Summer Scholars Program, which is a funded summer 6-week elective experience, but only for first-year medical students at selected academic institutions around the country. This is done through hospitals. In general, applications come out in December and are due by February. And then finally, the Global Genes Rare Compassion Project. Accepted applicants, which are usually medical students, are matched with rare disease patients and families. Applications are accepted year-round and matches occur quarterly. Those applicants who are matched are eligible to submit an essay about their experience to qualify for a scholarship. So again, these will be distributed to you. If you have any questions about them, please write in. So at this point, I want to thank our speakers for coming this evening and sharing their passion, their interest, their advice. And I want to thank all of you for listening and for your interest in genetics. Please continue to be interested and let us know if we can help you think this through as your career choice. So with this, I'm going to end the program, but we're going to have an evaluation poll. So Kevin, can you begin that?
Sure, thanks, Mark. My name is Kevin Fried. I'm on the board of directors of Rare New England, and On behalf of RNA, I want to thank all the speakers. This is fascinating tonight, and it's great to hear your career stories and then your scientific stories and what you're doing now to make a difference, including talking to people who are interested in following in your footsteps. So thank you very much. I've got a short poll that I'd like the attendees to do. I'm going to activate that now, and I'll leave it up for a couple minutes. There's 4 or 5 questions. It shouldn't take you more than 20 or 30 seconds. Do you have another song for us, Mark?
Another song. Good night, ladies. Good night, lady. There's no genetics in that though. But the song I sang at the beginning was written in the 1940s. And if you go on to YouTube, you will hear any number of versions of that by really good speakers, Willie Nelson and others. But actually, I was the first one to actually develop the pedigree on the way to presenting a lecture at the National Society of Genetic Counselors board review course. It was interesting because many of those genetic counseling students, they actually didn't have any training at all in metabolism. So the first time they met metabolism was at the board review course. So the tension in the room was so high that you had to, I needed things to break it. So in the middle of the lecture, I would just break into song just to break the anxiety. So
It's a good technique. Okay, it looks like just about everybody who's going to answer has answered. So I'm going to close the poll now. And I want to thank everybody again for attending. And we're going to end our evening. Have a great night.
bye and good luck.